I am going to tell you something that most people in my position never say out loud. Most messages like this one begin by telling you that God is about to do something incredible in your life, and they say it with a confidence that sounds beautiful but never quite lands in the specific place where you actually live. And you sit there listening, and part of you wants to receive it, and part of you is quietly thinking, I have heard this before. I have pressed play on a message exactly like this. One before. I have leaned in, I have felt something stir, and then I went back to my life and nothing changed. Not dramatically, not in the way that felt proportional to the hope I had allowed myself to feel. And so you learned to listen with one hand open and one hand held back, because full belief started to feel like a risk you could not keep affording to take. That is the thing no one says. That is what I am admitting to you right now before we go any further, because you deserve a message that begins with honesty rather than performance. The kind of faith the chosen ones carry is not the kind that feels effortless. It is the kind that survives its own doubts. It is the kind that keeps showing up even after showing up has stopped producing visible results. And if that description fits the shape of where you are right now, then what I am about to tell you is not for a general audience. It is specifically for you. You are a chosen one. And I want to be careful with that phrase because it has been used so many times in so many places that it has started to feel like a greeting rather than a declaration. So let me tell you what I actually mean when I say it. I mean that your life carries a specific assignment that was written before you were born, and that assignment has been the quiet source of everything that has felt different about you for as long as you can remember. The way you think, the way you feel things more deeply than the people around you seem to, the way you have never been fully able to make peace with ordinary, no matter how hard you have tried, the way something in you keeps reaching for more, even when more has taken longer than your patience wanted to allow. That is not restlessness without purpose. That is a chosen life, making itself known through the only language available to it, when the full picture has not yet been revealed. There are specific signs that mark a person who carries this kind of calling, and I want to name them now, because most people who are walking through what you are walking through have never had anyone name it accurately. The first sign is that your dreams have become more vivid and more insistent than they were a year ago. There is a quality to them that feels less like random imagery and more like communication. You wake from some of them with a feeling that sits in your chest for hours, something between recognition and longing, as if the version of your life that is coming was briefly visible and then retreated before you could hold it clearly. You are not imagining that. That is not your mind creating false comfort. That is the language of preparation being spoken to you in the only hours still enough to carry it. The second sign is a specific kind of exhaustion that rest does not fully cure. Not physical exhaustion, though that is often present too. A deeper kind. The exhaustion of holding a vision that your current circumstances have not yet validated. The exhaustion of being faithful to something you cannot fully explain to the people closest to you. The exhaustion of carrying a sense of destiny in a season that has offered very little external evidence that the destiny is real. That exhaustion is not weakness. It is the weight of something significant being held by someone who was built to carry it. The third sign is that separation has been a consistent theme in your recent seasons. People who should have stayed, left. Environments that felt safe became uncomfortable. Connections that once felt easy became strained without clear reason. And you have wondered whether something was wrong with you, whether you were the common denominator in all of that distance. I want to offer you a different interpretation. Chosen ones are often separated before they are elevated. The connections that could not survive. The preparation were not meant to survive it. The environments that became too small were not punishing you. They were releasing you. The fourth sign is that you carry an awareness of other people's pain that sometimes feels like more than you asked for. You notice what is unspoken. You sense what is underneath the surface of conversations. You absorb the emotional weight of rooms and relationships in ways that leave you depleted in ways others around you do not seem to experience. You have wondered whether this sensitivity is something to manage or something to correct. It is neither. It is the beginning of your assignment. The capacity to feel what others cannot articulate is not a burden without purpose. It is preparation for a specific kind of service that only someone built like you can offer. The fifth sign is the one that matters most in this moment. You are still here. After everything that has tested your belief, after every season that ended without the resolution you prayed for, after every morning that required you to choose faith again without new evidence, you are still here. You did not walk away. You did not let go completely. Something in you held on, even in the moments when holding on made no rational sense. That is not stubbornness. That is the mark of someone whose calling is so embedded in who they are that even their doubt cannot fully dislodge it. You were not made to blend in. You were not made to arrive at the end of your life having played it safe and stayed small and kept your dreams at a manageable size so that disappointment would hurt less. You were made for something that requires every season you have already survived. Every loss, every closed door, every night you spent awake with questions that had no immediate answers. None of it was wasted. All of it was material. Heaven did not say soon. Heaven said now. There is something I want you to notice about where you are right now. Not the physical location, though that matters too. I mean the interior location. The place inside you where you have been living for the past several months, or perhaps the past several years. There is a specific emotional landscape that chosen ones inhabit during the season right before their breakthrough, and most people who are inside it do not have a name for what they are experiencing. They just know that something feels heavier than it used to. They just know that certain mornings require more effort than they can easily explain. They just know that the version of themselves they present to the world and the version of themselves that exists in the quiet hours have started to feel further apart than they are comfortable admitting. I want to name what you are carrying, not to pull you deeper into it, but because there is something powerful that happens when someone finally puts language around a feeling you have been holding without words. When someone names it accurately, something in you exhales. Something in you says, yes, that is exactly it. I thought I was the only one who felt that way. You are not the only one. And what you are feeling is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that something significant is being prepared. The first thing I want to name is the wave of grief that arrives without warning. You will be in the middle of an ordinary moment, washing dishes, driving a familiar road, sitting in a meeting that has nothing to do with anything personal, and something will move through you that feels like sadness, but is larger than any specific loss you can point to. It is the grief of a season that has lasted longer than you planned for. It is the grief of a version of your life that you imagined would be further along by now. It is the grief of having hoped and waited and hoped again and found yourself in what feels like the same conversation with the same questions with no new answers available. That wave is real. It is not weakness. It is not faithlessness. It is the emotional cost of being someone who carries something significant in a season that has not yet made the significance visible. The second thing I want to name is the feeling that certain places and certain people have started to feel unfamiliar in a way they did not before. You walk into rooms you have walked into 100 times, and something feels slightly off, like the frequency has shifted. And you can feel the difference even though you cannot explain it to anyone without sounding strange. People you have known for years sometimes feel like strangers in ways that confuse you. Conversations that used to feel easy now feel like they require a translation you do not have. This is not you becoming cold or disconnected. This is you outgrowing a version of your environment that was always only meant to be temporary. When a chosen one is being repositioned, the old environment naturally begins to feel like clothing that no longer fits. The discomfort is not rejection. It is information. The third thing I want to name is the recurring dream, or the recurring theme in your dreams. The one involving a door that has not yet opened, or a place you are trying to reach but have not arrived at, or a version of yourself that is standing just ahead of where you currently are, visible but not yet accessible. You have had variations of this dream more than once, and you wake from it with a feeling that is difficult to categorize. Somewhere between hope and ache, because the thing you saw felt real and close and true, but the waking world has not yet confirmed it. That dream is not your mind tormenting you with things you cannot have. That dream is a preview. It is the chosen one's interior life, showing them what the exterior life is moving toward, even when the movement is not yet visible. The fourth thing I want to name is the experience of receiving the same message from multiple directions in a short period of time. A verse you have not thought about in months appears in a song, then in a conversation, then in something you read, all within the same week. A specific word or phrase keeps surfacing in unconnected places. Someone says something to you in passing that lands with a weight entirely disproportionate to the casualness with which it was delivered. You notice this. You have been noticing this. And you have wondered whether you are reading too much into coincidence. You are not reading too much into it. When heaven is speaking, it tends to speak through repetition, because the chosen one's life is busy and loud, and the message needs to appear in enough places that it cannot be dismissed as accident. I want to speak now to the specific pain that these seasons produce, because naming the signs is not enough. The sleeplessness is real. The nights when your mind will not quiet down, when you cycle through the same concerns with the same absence of resolution. When 3 in the morning finds you more awake than you want to be, staring at a ceiling that offers nothing useful back. That is real, and it is costly, and it deserves to be acknowledged before anyone tells you what it means. The loneliness is real. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, though sometimes that too, but the specific loneliness of being surrounded by people who do not have access to the interior of what you are carrying. The loneliness of smiling in the right places and saying the right things and performing the version of yourself that the situation requires, while something underneath all of that performance is quietly waiting for one person to see past it and ask the real question. That loneliness is one of the most specific costs of being chosen, and it is one of the least spoken about. The feeling that you have made a wrong turn somewhere is real. The quiet suspicion that perhaps the version of your life you have been believing for is not the version that is actually coming, that perhaps you misheard something, misread something, hoped for the wrong thing in the wrong direction. That suspicion visits chosen ones more often than anyone in this type of message usually admits. And it is not evidence that you are wrong. It is evidence that you are human, and that faith costs something real, and that the cost is not disqualifying. The feeling of being misunderstood is real, of having a vision inside you that you cannot fully transfer to the people closest to you, of watching them love you with a version of you that is smaller than who you actually are, of being reduced, not out of cruelty, but out of their limited access to the full picture of what you carry. That reduction is painful in a way that is hard to express without sounding arrogant, because how do you say that you feel larger than your current circumstances without sounding like you think you are better than the people around you? You do not think that. You just know that what is inside you has not yet found its full expression, and the gap between the inside and the outside is where the loneliness lives. Now I want to reframe something for you, and I need you to stay with me for a moment, because this reframe is the difference between surviving your current season and actually receiving what it is offering you. You have been thinking of this period as waiting, as the space between where you are and where you are supposed to be, as a hallway between two rooms, necessary but not the destination. But I want to suggest that waiting is the wrong word, not because your patience has not been real, but because it frames you as passive and frames heaven as delayed. Neither of those things is true. There are two categories of experience that look identical from the outside but are completely different in nature. The first is being overlooked, being passed over, being the person who was not chosen, not noticed, not included, being the one who waited and waited, and the thing never came because the thing was never coming. That is one kind of experience, and it is painful and real, and it happens and it deserves to be grieved. The second is being positioned, being placed, being held in a specific location for a specific period, because the timing of your emergence matters, and the preparation of your environment matters, and the readiness of the people who will receive you when you step forward matters. Being positioned looks exactly like being overlooked from the outside. The calendar looks the same. The waiting looks the same. The silence from heaven looks the same. But the nature of what is happening underneath is completely different. You have not been overlooked. You have been positioned. The season you are in has not been wasted time collecting dust in a hallway. It has been sacred time, active time in which something essential has been happening inside you and around you that your impatience could not see and your grief could not access, but that has been real and purposeful and moving forward the entire time. You are not behind. You are not the person who was passed over while everyone else moved ahead. You are the person being held in the exact location where the preparation requires you to be, for exactly as long as the preparation requires, and not one day longer than that. If you recognize yourself somewhere in what I have just described, if something in you exhaled when I named the wave of grief, or the unfamiliarity of old environments, or the recurring dream about the door not yet open, if something in you said yes, that is exactly it, then I want you to do one thing. If you recognize yourself in what I just described, type the words "I see it" in the comments below. Not to perform belief for an audience, but because there is something that shifts when a chosen one declares their own recognition. When you name what you are experiencing out loud, you move from passenger to participant. You stop being someone to whom things are happening, and you become someone who is actively receiving what has been prepared. And if this message has met you somewhere real today, if it has reached a part of you that does not usually get reached, I want to ask you something gently. This channel exists because people like you showed up and made it possible. If you are able to support the work through a donation, even a small one, There is a link available, and every contribution goes directly toward making sure this message reaches the next chosen one who is waking up tomorrow without anyone to name what they are carrying. You can also like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so that the next message finds you before you have to go looking for it. Not for me, for the person sitting exactly where you were sitting before you pressed play today. You are not overlooked. You are not forgotten. You are not behind. You are positioned, protected, and being prepared for something that required every single day of the season you are currently finishing. The waiting was not empty. It was full. It has always been full. There is a practice I want to give you today. Not a theory. Not a concept to carry around in your head and think about during the quiet moments. An actual practice. Something with steps. Something you can do today. In the space you are currently in. With the time you currently have. Without any special equipment or preparation or prior experience. I want to give you this now because one of the most disorienting things about the season chosen ones walk through is the feeling of having nowhere to put the energy of belief. You believe something is coming. You sense that something is shifting. But belief without a place to land can turn into anxiety, and I do not want that for you. I want to give your faith somewhere to stand. I am calling this practice the returning protocol. And the name matters, so I want to explain it before I walk you through the steps. The word returning is chosen deliberately, not returning as in going back to something you lost, but returning as in the way a compass needle returns to true north when you stop forcing it in another direction. The returning protocol is not about manufacturing a feeling or performing a spiritual exercise for the benefit of an audience, or checking a box on a list of things faithful people are supposed to do. It is about returning to what is already true about you, underneath the noise of the season, underneath the weight of the waiting, underneath the story that your circumstances have been telling about your life. There is a truer story. This practice is how you return to it. You can do this sitting down or standing up. You can do it at your kitchen table or in your car before you go inside after a long day. You can do it in a bathroom with the door closed if that is the only private space available to you right now. The location does not matter. The intention does. So take one slow breath before we begin. Not a dramatic breath, not a performance. Just the kind of breath that says, I am here, I am present. I am willing to receive what this moment is offering. The first step of the returning protocol is this. Think of one thing you are grateful that did not happen. Not the things you are grateful for. You have that list. You know how to make that list. This is different. This is harder and more specific and ultimately more powerful. I want you to think of one thing that you wanted, that you prayed for, that you worked toward, that you hoped would come through, and it did not. A relationship that did not develop the way you wanted it to. A job that did not come through. A season that ended before you were ready for it to end. A door that closed in your face at a moment when you needed it to open. Something that felt at the time like a direct contradiction of everything you had been believing for. Now I want you to look at that thing and ask yourself one honest question. Who would I be today if that had gone the way I wanted it to go? Not as a rhetorical exercise, as a real question. Because chosen ones who look back honestly at the things that did not happen the way they planned almost always find the same thing waiting for them in that reflection. They find that the version of their life they were so desperate to hold on to would have kept them exactly where they were. The relationship they grieved would have required them to remain a smaller version of themselves in order to survive it. The opportunity they mourned would have taken them in a direction that had nothing to do with where they were actually supposed to go. The door that closed was not closed against them. It was closed to protect the trajectory that a more generous version of the plan had already set in motion. Gratitude for what did not happen is one of the most powerful spiritual postures available to a chosen one, because it requires you to trust the wisdom of a story that includes chapters you did not write and would not have chosen. It requires you to believe that the author of your life has access to information you do not have. And when you can stand in front of the thing that hurt you and say, "I am grateful this did not go the way I wanted, because I can see now even partially that something better was being protected." Something shifts in you. Something releases. The grip of the past loosens just enough to let the future move. Take a moment with that. Do not rush past the first step to get to the second one. The first step deserves the full weight of your attention. Sit with the thing that did not happen. Let yourself feel the original grief of it if it comes. And then let yourself feel the gratitude that can only be accessed from the distance of the present moment. Both feelings can exist at the same time. The grief does not disqualify the gratitude. The gratitude does not erase the grief. They coexist, and together, they produce something that neither of them can produce alone, which is a kind of peace that is not dependent on circumstances. A peace that chosen ones carry into rooms and deposit there without always knowing they have done it. The second step of the returning protocol is a declaration. And I want to be specific about what this declaration is and what it is not. It is not a performance. It is not something you say loudly in the hope that the volume will create the conviction. It is a quiet statement, said in whatever voice is available to you right now, that aligns your words with the truth that your feelings have not always been able to access. The declaration is this. Say it in your own voice, in whatever language lives closest to your heart. Say it now, or say it when you are alone later, today. But say it out loud, because there is a difference between a thought and a spoken word. And chosen ones who are standing on the threshold of their next season need to hear themselves say true things out loud. The declaration is, I am not behind. I am not forgotten. I am not being punished by this silence. I am being positioned. What has been promised over my life has not expired. It has not been given to someone else. It has not been canceled by my mistakes, or my doubts, or the length of the season I have been walking through. The timing of my life is not governed by a calendar I can see. It is governed by a wisdom I can trust, and I choose in this moment to trust it. Say that in your own words. Adjust the language until it fits your mouth and your heart and the specific shape of what you have been believing for. But say something that places your agreement on the side of the promise rather than on the side of the delay. Because where you place your agreement in this season matters. The words you speak over your own life in the quiet moments that no one else witnesses are not small. They are seeds, and chosen ones who learn to speak truth over themselves in the hidden seasons are the ones who find that the harvest arrives with a fullness that surprises even them. This declaration connects directly to something I introduced in the last part of this message. The idea that you are not overlooked but positioned. The declaration is how you take that idea out of your intellect and plant it somewhere deeper. When you say out loud that you are positioned, you are doing something that your circumstances cannot do for you. You are choosing the interpretation of your own story. You are refusing to let the delay write the conclusion. You are exercising the specific authority that chosen ones carry, the authority to name what is true before it is visible. The third step is the one that creates the space for everything else to settle. And this step is simple in description and requires more than it appears to require, purport in practice. The third step is 7 minutes of intentional silence. Not 7 minutes of trying to have the right thoughts. Not 7 minutes of reviewing your prayer list or mentally rehearsing your concerns. 7 minutes of simply being still and available. 7 minutes of placing yourself in a posture of receiving rather than requesting. 7 minutes of trusting that what needs to move in your life does not need your management in this particular window of time. It needs your presence. It needs the kind of quiet that chosen ones rarely give themselves. Because the noise of the season makes stillness feel like irresponsibility. 7 minutes is a specific number, and I chose it deliberately, and I will explain more about why this specific window of time carries the weight it carries when we get further into this message. But for now, I want you to understand something important about what happens in 7 minutes of genuine stillness that does not happen in 30 minutes of distracted activity. Something in the brain shifts. Something in the nervous system releases. Something in the interior life of a chosen one begins to settle into a frequency that is closer to the frequency of what has been prepared for them. And that alignment, that settling, creates a receptivity that the busy mind cannot access no matter how much it wants to. So the practice is this. After you do the first step, the gratitude for what did not happen, and after you speak the second step, the declaration that places your agreement on the side of the promise, you give yourself 7 minutes. You put the phone down if you can. You close the laptop. You let the room be quiet, and you simply sit in the truth that you have just declared. You let it settle. You let it reach the places in you that the mind was too loud to access before you made it quiet. This is the returning protocol, 3 steps, available to you today in the space where you are with the time you have. It does not require a special location or a particular emotional state or a level of faith that feels more advanced than what you currently carry. It requires only your willingness to return to who you are underneath the season, to return to what is true about your life underneath the circumstances, to return to the frequency of the chosen one that you have always been, even in the seasons when nothing around you confirmed it. The third step, those 7 minutes of silence, is not simply a spiritual practice in isolation. It is also preparation for something I want to share with you in just a moment. Something discovered through decades of research into what actually happens inside the brain of a person who consistently creates that kind of stillness. What researchers have found in that specific window of intentional quiet is something that connects the spiritual experience of chosen ones to the measurable science of what the human brain does when it is given permission to return to its own deepest frequency. And what they found changes the way you understand everything you have been experiencing in this season. But before we get there, I want you to do one thing. I want you to actually do this practice today, not tomorrow, not when the season is less busy or the circumstances are more cooperative. Today. Because the chosen one who acts on what they receive is the one who finds as that receiving becomes easier and faster and more consistent. And you have waited long enough for things to become easier. Starting today, something shifts, starting with 3 steps. Starting with 7 minutes, starting now. I want to pick up exactly where we left off, because the third step of the returning protocol, those 7 minutes of intentional silence, is not an accident. It is not a number I chose because it sounded spiritual or because it fit neatly into the rhythm of this message. 7 minutes is a specific number rooted in something that researchers have been studying for decades. Something that connects the interior experience of chosen ones directly to the measurable science of what happens inside. The human brain when it is given permission to stop performing and start receiving. And when you understand what actually happens in that window of time, the practice stops being something you do out of obedience and becomes something you do out of understanding. Because chosen ones who understand why something works are chosen ones who actually do it consistently. Here is what I need you to understand first. Before we get to the science, before we get to the research, before we get to the specific tool I am about to share with you, there is a reason that chosen ones carry a specific quality in their presence that other people can feel but cannot always name. You have experienced this. You have walked into a room and someone has said to you, "There is something different about you," without being able to explain what that difference is. You have had conversations where the other person left feeling something they did not expect to feel when they sat down with you. You have been told that talking to you felt like something shifted, like something settled, like something became clearer than it was before. And you have not always known what to do with that feedback because from the inside, you have often felt like the opposite of settled. From the inside, the season has felt loud and uncertain and heavy in ways that contradict the calm that other people perceive in you. The reason for that gap is this: chosen ones carry a specific neurological frequency. Researchers call it gamma. And before you think this message has taken a turn you were not expecting, I want you to stay with me. Because the bridge between what you know spiritually and what science has been quietly confirming is one of the most important bridges you will cross in this particular season of your life. Gamma brainwave activity, which operates at frequencies above 40 Hz, is associated with states of heightened awareness, peak cognitive performance, moments of sudden clarity and insight that researchers sometimes call eureka states, and a quality of consciousness that has historically been documented most consistently in two categories of people. The first category is children, specifically children under the age of 12, whose brains have not yet been conditioned by the accumulated weight of stress and disappointment and learned limitation. The second category is individuals who have been identified across multiple cultures and multiple centuries as operating at a level of wisdom and perception and creative capacity that their contemporaries could not fully explain. In other words, chosen ones. The science has a different name for what the spirit has always known, but they are describing the same reality. Now, here is where the research becomes personally relevant to you and to the 7 minutes we talked about in the last section. A neuroscientist named Dr. James Rivers, trained at MIT and connected to research conducted in partnership with NASA over a period spanning more than 30 years, dedicated the majority of his professional life to one specific question. Not how do we make people smarter in the conventional sense, but how do we return the adult brain to the frequency it was operating at before the world conditioned it into smallness? How do we restore what was lost? How do we reactivate what was always there but has been suppressed by stress and survival and the accumulated weight of seasons that asked too much and gave back too little? What Dr. Rivers and his team discovered across thousands of days of research is that the brain does not lose its capacity for gamma wave activity. It does not lose access to the frequency of clarity and insight and creative expansion that chosen ones carry at their deepest level. What happens instead is that the brain becomes trained through repetition and stress and the ongoing demands of daily survival to operate primarily in lower frequency states, beta waves, which are associated with analytical thinking and stress responses, alpha waves, which carry a quality of relaxed alertness but do not access the deeper levels of insight, and in states of extreme exhaustion or overwhelm, theta waves, which sit at a frequency of 4 to 8 Hz and are associated with the kind of deep creative, knowing that surfaces most often in the space between waking and sleeping. The discovery that changed everything in Dr. Rivers' research was not that gamma waves exist. That had been documented. The discovery was that the brain can be guided back to gamma frequency through a specific and precisely calibrated audio input. That the brain has a natural tendency, when exposed to the right external frequency, to synchronize with that frequency and to sustain it in ways it cannot sustain through willpower or intention alone. This phenomenon is called brainwave entrainment, and it is the core mechanism behind what Dr. Rivers spent 3 decades refining into something that anyone can access. The technology that emerged from that research uses 2 specific tools working together. The first is binaural beats, which are created when 2 slightly different frequencies are delivered separately to each ear, causing the brain to perceive a third frequency, that is, the mathematical difference between the 2. The second is isochronic tones, which are evenly spaced pulses of sound that reinforce the target frequency through rhythmic repetition. Together, these 2 elements create an audio environment that the brain responds to not as external noise, but as an invitation to return to its own deepest frequency. The frequency it was operating at before the world asked it to become smaller. The frequency that chosen ones recognize when they finally return to it, not as something new, but as something they have always known. The result of this research is a 7-minute audio program called the Genius Wave. And I want to be specific about why 7 minutes, because this is not an arbitrary number chosen for marketing convenience. Dr. Rivers' research identified 7 minutes as the optimal window for the brain to complete a full entrainment cycle without triggering the kind of cognitive fatigue that longer sessions can produce. 7 minutes is enough time for the brain to shift from its default operating frequency into gamma coherence. It is not so long that the conscious mind begins to resist or wander into the kind of analytical engagement that interrupts the process. 7 minutes is the specific window that the research identified as producing the most consistent results across the largest number of participants. This is why the third step of the returning protocol is 7 minutes. Because those 7 minutes of intentional silence are more powerful when the brain has been given a tool that helps it actually arrive at the frequency the silence is intended to create. Chosen ones who practice stillness are already doing something right. Chosen ones who practice stillness with a tool calibrated to guide the brain into the specific frequency where clarity and insight and receptivity live are doing something that compounds in ways that become visible within days. I want to tell you about someone who found the genius wave at a moment that sounds very much like where you are right now. Her name is not important, but her situation is. She had been in what she described as the longest dry season of her life. 18 months of showing up faithfully to her work, to her relationships, to her prayer life, and feeling like she was pressing against a wall that would not move. She found this program not because she was looking for a neuroscience tool. She found it because she was looking for anything that could help her brain get quiet enough to hear something other than the noise of her own exhaustion. She used it for 7 minutes every morning for 2 weeks. She told me that what shifted first was not external. It was the quality of her own thoughts. The internal critic that had been running a constant commentary on everything she had not yet accomplished began to quiet. The clarity she had been praying for began to arrive not in dramatic moments, but in small, consistent daily insights that started to add up into a direction she could actually follow. Within 6 weeks, a professional opportunity appeared that she described as arriving from a completely unexpected direction. Within 3 months, she said the season she had been surviving had become a season she was actually living. I know that some of you are thinking right now that $39 is not nothing. And I want to honor that thought rather than dismiss it, because chosen ones who'd have been in survival seasons know better than anyone that every dollar carries the weight of what it costs to earn it. The hesitation you feel is not lack of faith. It is the wisdom of someone who has learned to be careful with limited resources. I hear that. I respect that. And I also want to say this. The Genius Wave is normally available for $49. Through the link in the pinned comment below, it is available today for $39. It comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee, which means you have 3 full months to experience what 7 minutes a day actually does in your specific life. And if at the end of that period you do not feel that anything has shifted, you receive your full investment back without question. Risk is structured entirely in your favor. There is one more thing I need to say clearly. There are versions of this program circulating in places that are not authorized. If you find the Genius Wave anywhere other than the link in the pinned comment below, what you are receiving is not the program that Dr. Rivers' research produced. The only version that carries the full calibration of the original research is the one available through that specific link. Please protect yourself by purchasing only through that source. This offer is available for a limited time, and the pricing I have shared today is not guaranteed to remain in place. The number of units available at this price point is finite, and when that number is reached, the price returns to its standard level. I am not telling you this to create pressure. I am telling you because chosen ones who are in a season of repositioning benefit from moving with the opportunities that arrive, rather than letting them pass while waiting for a more convenient moment. The convenient moment is rarely the one that changes things. The moment you are in right now is the one that changes things. 7 minutes, that is all. 7 minutes a day. The same 7 minutes you already committed to in the returning protocol. The same 7 minutes that your brain has been waiting for permission to use in the way it always designed to use them. The Genius Wave is not a shortcut. It is a return to the frequency you were carrying before the world asked you to carry something else instead. And chosen ones who return to their frequency do not just feel better. They begin to move differently. They begin to receive differently. They begin to recognize the doors that were always there, but that the noise of the season had been too loud to let them see clearly. Before I move into what I need to say in this section, I want to acknowledge something first. If the information about the Genius Wave resonated with you, if something in you recognized the connection between minute 7 we talked about and the specific kind of stillness your life has been asking for, I want you to trust that recognition. Chosen ones do not stumble accidentally onto tools that align this precisely with what they have been practicing. The recognition itself is information. But now I need to take you somewhere harder, because the message that only tells you what is coming without honoring what it costs to get here is not a complete message. And you deserve a complete message. I want to talk about what the waiting has taken, not what it has built in you, not the character it has produced, or the depth it has created, or the wisdom it has deposited. Those things are real, and we will get there. But I am not going to rush past the cost to get to the lesson, because Chosen ones who have never had anyone sit with them in the actual grief of their season have learned to perform the lesson before they have finished processing the cost. And that performance, however sincere, leaves something unfinished underneath. Something that surfaces later in ways you did not expect. I do not want that for you. So I am going to sit here with you for a moment in the honest inventory of what these years have actually taken from your life. The first thing the waiting has taken is the relationships that should have been built during this season, but were not. Not because you failed at them, but because the season itself created conditions that made certain kinds of connection harder to sustain. The version of you that has been in survival mode, the version that has been conserving energy, managing uncertainty, showing up faithfully to the responsibilities that could not wait while quietly setting aside the parts of yourself that needed tending. That version of you has not always had enough left over to invest in relationships the way you would have wanted to. And people who needed more than that version of you could give have drifted. Some of them drifted quietly. Some of them left in ways that felt like rejections. And either way, there are connections that should have been deeper by now. Friendships that should have been further along. Intimacies that should have been built, that instead exist in a kind of permanent almost. And that loss is real. And it is specific, and it deserves to be named. The second thing the waiting has taken is the career trajectory that should have moved further by now. I am not talking about titles or salaries, though those things matter, and I am not going to minimize them. I am talking about a sense of momentum, the feeling of moving forward in your work in a direction that feels aligned with who you actually are. Chosen ones who are in the wrong season or the wrong environment professionally spend enormous amounts of energy simply maintaining, simply surviving the distance between where they are and where they sense they are supposed to be. And that energy is not nothing. That energy is years. That energy is ideas that never got developed because the environment was not safe enough or resourced enough or aligned enough to receive them. That energy is the creative capacity of a chosen one being spent on maintenance rather than on the work they were actually built to do. And the gap between the work you have been doing and the work you were designed for is not a small gap. It has a weight, and that weight has been on you longer than is fair. The third thing the waiting has taken is the freedom to tell your dreams at full size. Do you remember when you used to say out loud what you were believing for, without immediately adding the qualifications? Without following the dream with the disclaimer that softened it for the ears of people who might find it too large? At some point in this season, you learned to make your dreams smaller before you shared them. Not because you stopped believing in them privately, but because the distance between the size of what you were carrying and the size of what your current circumstances could validate had become too embarrassing to expose without protection. And so you started editing. You started pre-shrinking the vision before it left your mouth, offering people a manageable version of what you were actually reaching for. Because the full version had been met one too many times with a silence or a skepticism that cost more than you had available to spend. That editing is not dishonesty. It is self-protection. But it has also created a loneliness that lives specifically in the gap between the dream you carry in private and the version you present in public. And that loneliness has a specific texture that I think you know very well. The fourth thing the waiting has taken is perhaps the most tender one to name. It has taken, at least partially, your trust in yourself. The sustained experience of believing and waiting and not yet seeing the fullness of what you believed for has created a quiet question inside you that you do not always acknowledge consciously, but that runs underneath a lot of your decisions. The question sounds like this: what if I am wrong about myself? What if the sense of calling I have been carrying is not accurate? What if the version of my life I have been believing for is something I constructed out of hope rather than something that was actually placed inside me by a wisdom greater than my own? That question is not evidence that you are wrong, but it is evidence of what the season has cost, and it deserves to be named before anyone tells you to simply believe harder. Now I want to bring someone into this space with us, not to rush past your pain into a lesson, but because this person's story contains something I want you to see before we move forward. I want to talk about Joseph, not the whole story. Not the part where the dreams come true and the brothers bow and the full meaning of everything becomes visible at once. Just the early part. Just the part that corresponds to where you are right now. Joseph was a young man who carried a dream that was larger than his environment. He had a specific sense of his own calling that was genuine and real and given to him by something outside himself. And the people closest to him, the people who should have been his safest audience, could not receive what he was carrying. Not entirely out of malice, though malice was present, but because the size of what he carried created a discomfort in the people around him that expressed itself as rejection, as diminishment, as an active effort to reduce him to a size that felt less threatening. And then came the pit. Not as a metaphor, as a literal experience of being placed in a low, dark, confined space by the very people who should have celebrated him. And I want you to sit with the specific cruelty of that for a moment, not to dramatize it, but because chosen ones who are in the middle of their own version of the pit need to know that they are not in unprecedented territory. The pit did not mean Joseph was wrong about his calling. The pit did not mean the dream was a fabrication. The pit did not mean he was being punished for the audacity of believing he was chosen. The pit was part of the trajectory, not the destination, not the final word, not evidence that dream was false, but a chapter inside the story that the dream required in order to arrive at its full expression. Then came the years in Potiphar's house. Years of faithfulness in an environment that was not his assignment, but that required his full integrity anyway. Years of doing excellent work in a place that was temporary, of building skills and character, and a specific kind of inner stability in a season that offered no preview of what the skills and character were being prepared for. Years of being faithful to a process whose purpose he could not yet see. Then came the prison. A second confinement. This time not from the people who were supposed to love him, but from a system that had no particular interest in his destiny. And in that prison, Joseph was not passive. He was present. He was available. He was the person other people brought their dreams to, which is the specific irony of a chosen one in a confined season. They become the interpreter of other people's futures. While their own future remains unclear, I am not going to tell you how the story ends today. You know how it ends. But I want you to notice where we stopped. I want you to notice that the story of one of the most clearly chosen lives in recorded history contains actual years, of pit and prison and faithful obscurity. I want you to notice that the calling did not protect Joseph from the cost. The calling was the reason for the cost, and the cost was not wasted. Every day of it was being counted, cataloged, and applied to a purpose that required the specific formation that only those specific seasons could produce. You are not in unprecedented territory. The shape of your season has a name. The name is preparation. Not punishment, not abandonment, not evidence that the dream was wrong. Preparation. And I need you to sit with that before I say anything else. Not receive it as a concept, not add it to your collection of encouraging ideas. Sit with it as a specific truth about your specific life. The pit you have been in is not your destination. The prison of this season is not your final address. The faithfulness you have been practicing in an environment that does not yet reflect your assignment is not wasted faithfulness. It is the kind that produces the specific interior stability that chosen ones need to carry the weight of what is coming without being undone by it. The waiting has taken real things. That is true, and I will not minimize it, but it has not taken the one thing that cannot be taken from a chosen one. It has not taken the calling itself. It has not canceled what was written before you were born. It has not given your assignment to someone else while you were in the process of being prepared to carry it. What was placed inside you before you arrived here is still there. The season has not emptied it. The season has been building the container that will allow you to hold it at full capacity when the fullness of it arrives. I want to introduce you to two words today, not English words. Words from older languages. Languages that were built to carry weight that modern vocabulary has not always been equipped to hold. I am bringing these words into this space because there is something that happens when you encounter a concept that has existed for thousands of years, and you recognize in it the exact shape of what you have been living through, but have never had precise language to describe. Something settles, something clarifies. And in this particular season of your life, clarity is not a luxury. It is a necessity. The first word is kairos. It comes from ancient Greek, and the simplest way I can explain it is this. The Greeks had two completely different words for time, and they understood them to be describing two entirely different realities, not just two different measurements of the same thing. The first word was chronos. Chronos is the time you can measure. It is the time on your phone and the date on your calendar and the number of months that have passed since you started praying for the thing you are still waiting for. Chronos is sequential. It moves in one direction at a fixed pace, and it does not negotiate with your circumstances or your faith or your need. Chronos is the time that has been making you feel behind. Chronos is the time that calculates your age against your goals and returns a number that your heart finds discouraging. Chronos is real, but it is not the only kind of time that governs a chosen one's life. Kairos is different. Kairos is not clock time. Kairos is appointed time. It is the moment that arrives, not because the calendar reached a certain number, but because everything required for that moment has finally been assembled. Kairos is the Greek word for the fullness of time, the right time, the moment that was always going to happen exactly when it happens, because its arrival was never governed by Chronos in the first place. Kairos moments cannot be rushed by effort or delayed by failure. They arrive when the conditions that were always required for their arrival have been met, not a day before, not a day after. Here is what I need you to understand about where you are right now. You have been measuring your life in Chronos. You have been looking at the calendar and calculating the distance between where you are and where you expected to be. And the mathematics of that calculation has been painful because in Chronos time, you are behind in Chronos time. The season has been longer than planned. In Chronos time, there is a gap between the promise and the fulfillment that looks like delay and feels like delay and has been interpreted by almost everyone around you as delay. But your life is not governed by Chronos. Your life, the specific life of a chosen one with a specific assignment written before your birth, operates in Kairos. And in Kairos time, you are not behind. You are not early. You are precisely on time for a moment that was always going to arrive exactly when the conditions required for its arrival were complete. Preparation. you have been walking through has not been filling time between now and the promise. The preparation has been assembling the conditions that the Kairos moment requires in order to arrive. And when those conditions are complete, the moment does not wait for a convenient season or a more favorable set of circumstances. It arrives fully, suddenly, with a completeness that makes every day of the preparation retroactively make sense. I want you to stop measuring your life in chronos. Not because the calendar is not real, but because it is not the clock that governs you. The clock that governs you is Kairos. And in that clock, the hands are moving exactly as they should. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are not the chosen one who almost made it. You are the chosen one who is about to step into the moment that was always written for exactly this point in the Piri story. The second word is kava. It is a Hebrew word, and it is one of the words most commonly translated in ancient texts as the word wait. And if you have ever heard someone tell you to simply wait on God and felt a quiet frustration with the instruction, I want you to understand why that frustration is actually accurate. Because the English word wait carries a specific meaning that is almost entirely passive. To wait in English is to be still while time passes, to be in a holding pattern, to be inactive while something external does the work. And if that is what kava means, then the instruction to wait on God is an instruction toward passivity that does not match the interior experience of chosen ones who have never once felt passive in their waiting, who have been doing enormous amounts of interior work throughout every season others might describe as waiting. Kava does not mean passive waiting. The root of the word kava in ancient Hebrew is actually an image of twisting, of braiding, of taking separate strands and intertwining them under tension until they form something stronger than any single strand could be on its own. The original image behind kava is the making of a rope. And a rope is not made by resting. It is made by the sustained application of tension to separate elements until they bind together into something that can bear weight that the individual strands never could. When the ancient texts say kava, they are not saying sit still and do nothing while you wait for something to happen to you. They are saying, let the separate strands of your experience, the loss, and the hope, and the grief, and the faith, and the silence, and the faithfulness, and the confusion, and the clarity, let all of those strands be held under the tension of trust until they twist together into something that can carry the weight of what is coming. Kava is not passive. Kava is the most demanding kind of active engagement available to a human being. It is the sustained choice to hold all the strands of your experience in tension with each other, without letting go of any of them, trusting that the tension itself is the mechanism by which something strong enough to carry your destiny is being formed. The years you have been calling waiting years are kava years. Every strand of your experience during this season, every loss and every small victory and every morning, you chose to get up again, and every night you cried prayers you were not sure were being received. Every single strand has been under tension, and that tension has not been wasted. That tension has been the mechanism. You have not been sitting in a hallway doing nothing. You have been inside the process of becoming something strong enough to carry what was always written for your life. You are not delayed. You are being assembled. Now I want to bring these two concepts together because separately they are powerful, but together they describe something that I think will change the way you interpret every day of this season that remains. You are living in Kairos time, which means the moment of your emergence is not governed by a calendar you can calculate, but by a completeness you can trust. And you have been in kava, which means the years that felt like waiting have actually been the braiding process. the formation of a strength inside you that the Kairos moment will require when it arrives. These two truths together produce a specific kind of peace that is different from the peace of resolution. The peace of resolution arrives when the circumstances change and the evidence finally agrees with the promise. That peace is wonderful, but it is not what chosen ones need most in the middle of their season. What chosen ones need most in the middle of their season is the peace of understanding. The peace that comes from knowing that what looks like delay from the outside is actually precision from the inside. The peace that comes from knowing that your life is not running behind schedule. It is running on the only schedule that actually governs it. There is a word from an ancient text that I want to place in this space, not as a citation, but as a living truth. It says that the appointed time will surely come. It will not be late. And I want you to hear that specific phrase with fresh ears. It will not be late. Not it will eventually arrive. Not it will come when you are ready. It will not be late. The appointed time, your Kairos moment, the moment that was written for your life before you were born, carries within it its own guarantee of timeliness. It cannot arrive late because lateness is a chronos concept, and your moment is governed by Kairos. It arrives when it arrives because its arrival is the very definition of on time. The wilderness, the season of isolation and uncertainty, and the particular silence that feels like being forgotten is not a detour from your destiny. It is the corridor that leads to it. Every chosen one who has ever been elevated to the assignment they were created for has passed through some version of the wilderness first. Not as punishment, not as a test of endurance for its own sake, but because the wilderness does something to the interior of a person that comfort cannot do. It strips away the dependencies that would have made the next season unsafe. It removes the reliances on human approval and external validation and circumstantial evidence that would have caused the chosen one to crumble under the weight of what the assignment actually requires. The wilderness is not where your story ends. The wilderness is where your story becomes strong enough to hold the ending it was always moving toward. And the midnight hour, the specific moment that feels like the darkest point, the moment when the last remaining option seems to be letting go of everything you have been holding, is not the end of the story. In the language of chosen ones across every culture and every century, midnight is not the conclusion. Midnight is the threshold. It is the last moment before the shift. It is the hour that chosen ones have always had to survive, not because heaven is cruel, but because the depth of what is on the other side of midnight, it requires the specific kind of person that only midnight can produce. You are being positioned. You are being assembled. You are not behind in Chronos time. You are precisely on time in Kairos. The strands of your experience are being braided by Kava into something that can carry the weight of everything that is coming. The wilderness is corridor, not conclusion. And midnight, if that is where you are, is not the end of the story. It is the last page before the chapter that changes everything. You are not being delayed. You are being completed. And what God has appointed for your life, no season of silence has the authority to cancel. No wilderness has the power to redirect, and no Chronos calculation has the accuracy to predict. The appointed time will come. And when it does, it will not be late. It will be exactly on time, because it always was. There is something shifting right now, not later. Not when the circumstances finally cooperate, or when the evidence catches up to the promise. Right now, in this specific season, in the days immediately surrounding the moment you are inside as you receive this message, something is moving in 3 areas of your life that have been the heaviest to carry. And I want to describe what that movement looks and feels like before it becomes fully visible. Because chosen ones who know what a shift feels. Like on the inside are chosen ones who do not miss it when it arrives. They do not talk themselves out of it. They do not explain it away. They receive it with both hands open because they were prepared to recognize it. The first area that is shifting is your inner world, the interior landscape of a chosen one who is approaching the end of a long season, undergoes specific changes that are subtle at first and then unmistakable. The first thing you will notice is a quality of quiet that feels different from the quiet of exhaustion. Exhaustion quiet is the silence of a person who has nothing left to say because the saying has cost too much for too long. What is coming is a different kind of quiet. It is the quiet of a person who has finally stopped arguing with their own calling. The quiet when you stop negotiating with God about the timeline and begin to simply occupy the truth of who you are without requiring the circumstances to confirm it first. That quiet is not resignation. It is not the giving up of hope dressed in spiritual language. It is the arrival of a settled knowing that chosen ones describe in almost identical terms across every culture and every generation. It feels like coming home to yourself after a very long time away. You will also notice a shift in the quality of your attention. The scattered, anxious, circular thinking that has characterized the heaviest parts of this season will begin to give way to something more focused and more directional. Ideas that have been circling without landing will begin to land. Clarity that has been available at the edges of your awareness, but not accessible to your conscious mind, will begin to move toward the center. This is not you thinking harder. This is the natural result of a chosen one whose interior life is no longer spending all of its energy on survival and is beginning to redirect that energy toward the assignment. The clarity is not coming from outside you. It has always been inside you. It is simply becoming accessible as the weight of the season begins to lift. What you should not do during this interior shift is try to accelerate it. The temptation when you begin to feel the quiet arriving is to press into it so hard that you disturb it, to analyze it so thoroughly that you turn it back into noise, to immediately translate every clarifying thought into an action plan, so comprehensive that the softness of the revelation gets buried under the weight of your productivity. Let the quiet be quiet. Let the clarity arrive at the pace it arrives. Trust that what is being downloaded into your interior life during this period does not need your management. It needs your receptivity. The practice I gave you in part 3, those 7 minutes of intentional silence, is specifically designed to create the conditions where this kind of interior shift can complete itself without interference. Use it every day. Let it do what it was designed to do. What you can trust during this interior shift is the knowing that surfaces in the stillness, not the anxious thoughts, not the fearful projections, not the voice that sounds like wisdom, but is actually the accumulated weight of every disappointment, teaching you to expect less. The knowing I am talking about is quieter than all of that. It arrives without urgency. It does not demand immediate action. It simply presents itself as true, and you recognize it as true before your analytical mind has had a chance to evaluate it, because the recognition comes from a part of you that is deeper than analysis. Trust that knowing. Write it down if you need to hold it, but trust it. The second area that is shifting is your relational landscape. And I want to describe this carefully, because the relational shift that chosen ones experience at the transition between seasons is one of the most disorienting parts of the process for people who were not prepared to recognize it. What is about to happen, or what may already be in the early stages of happening, is a natural sorting of the relationships in your life according to what the next season actually requires. Some people who have been present throughout your waiting season will begin to drift without dramatic conflict or clear explanation. Not because something went wrong between you, not because you failed each other, but because the version of you that is emerging requires a different kind of companion than the version of you that has been surviving required. Relationships that were formed around shared struggle are not always relationships that can survive shared elevation. The intimacy of the pit does not automatically translate into the intimacy of the platform. And when people who walked with you through the waiting begin to feel distant at the exact moment things start to shift, it can feel like betrayal. It can feel like abandonment. I want you to know in advance that it is neither. It is a natural reorganization of your relational world around the reality of who you are becoming. At the same time, and often in ways that feel almost inexplicably timely, new people will begin to appear. Not in large numbers. Chosen ones in transition do not need crowds. They need the right few. The person who appears in an unexpected setting and immediately speaks a language you recognize as your own. The connection that forms in an unlikely context and carries a quality of rightness that older relationships sometimes lost over time. The mentor or collaborator or community that you have been praying for without knowing exactly what you were praying for. These people are not accidents. They are positioned arrivals, assembled by the same wisdom that assembled the season you are finishing and the season you are entering. What you should not do during this relational shift is grieve the departures so loudly that you miss the arrivals. Both things are happening simultaneously, and the departure grief is more immediate and therefore louder. But the arrivals are more significant and deserve your attention. Pay attention to who shows up in your life in the coming weeks and months. Pay attention to the conversations that feel disproportionately meaningful. Pay attention to the connections that carry a quality of recognition from the first exchange. Those are not coincidences. Those are appointments. What you can trust during this relational shift is that the people who are meant to accompany you into the next season of your life are already in motion toward you, even if they have not arrived yet. You are not going into what is coming alone. You were never designed to. The third area that is shifting is the one that chosen ones are most cautious about naming out loud, because naming it has felt dangerous in seasons when the naming was followed by more waiting. I am going to end anyway because you need to hear it, and because the caution that has kept you from receiving fully is one of the things this season is in the process of dismantling. The third area that is shifting is provision, resources, the material reality of your life. I want to be specific about what this shift looks and feels like, because it rarely arrives the way we imagine it will. It rarely arrives as a single dramatic moment, where the deficit becomes surplus overnight. What chosen ones describe most consistently at the turning point of their seasons is a change in the quality of their relationship with lack, a shift from the anxious management of scarcity to a quieter trust in sufficiency. The provision that is coming does not always arrive all at once. But what shifts first is the interior experience of it. The chronic underlying anxiety about whether there will be enough begins to loosen, not because the circumstances have resolved, but because something in the chosen one's interior life has settled into a trust that the circumstances are about to begin reflecting. Then, from that place of interior settledness, opportunities begin to appear that were invisible during the anxious season. Not because the opportunities were not there before, but because the frequency of anxiety is not the frequency at which chosen ones recognize provision. The frequency of trust, the frequency of a person who has stopped white-knuckling their own survival and begun to occupy the posture of someone who is funded by something larger than their own effort. That frequency is the one at which provision becomes visible and receivable. What you should not do during this shift in provision is spend what has not yet arrived as if the arrival is guaranteed by your spending. The faith that opens the door to provision is not the faith that presumes on it before it comes. The faith that opens the door is the faith that holds itself in a posture of receiving, ready to steward well what arrives, not performing readiness, but actually being it. Chosen ones who have been through the wilderness know the difference between genuine readiness and the performance of it, and heaven knows the difference too. What you can trust during this shift in provision is that God does not fund assignments halfway. When the season turns, the resources that the assignment requires are not released reluctantly or sparingly. They are released in proportion to the assignment itself. And your assignment, the specific one that was written for your life before you arrived, is not a small one. It was never a small one. The provision that is being assembled for what is coming is proportional to the calling that is being activated. You will not be given just enough to survive the next chapter. You will be given what is required to actually live it, to inhabit it fully, to carry it with the generosity of someone who has more than enough, because the one funding the assignment has access to more than enough. If something in you recognized itself in these three areas today, if the interior shift resonated, if the relational reorganization sounds like something already in progress, if the shift in provision feels like something you have been sensing but have not allowed yourself to say out loud, I want to invite you to do one thing right now. Type the words "I receive" in the comments below. Not as a performance of faith for an audience, but as a declaration from the inside of your own story. When you say, I receive, you are not asking for something that has not been given. You are opening your hands to something that has already been prepared. You are choosing the posture of the chosen one, who knows that what is coming is not a reward to be earned, but a provision to be received. And if this message has been a companion to you today, if it has named something you needed, named or given language to something you have been living without words for, I want to ask you gently to share it. Not because the numbers matter, but because somewhere right now there is another chosen one who woke up this morning without anyone to name what they are carrying, who is one message away from the shift that changes how they inhabit the rest of this season. Share this for them, like it so, that it finds the next person who needs it. Subscribe so that the next message reaches you before you have to go looking for it again. Every one of those actions is an act of generosity toward a chosen one you may never meet, but whose life this message was also written for. The shift is real, it is already in motion, and it is moving in your direction. The three shifts I just described, the interior quiet, the relational reorganization, and the movement in provision, are not arriving into a person who is unprepared for them. They are arriving into someone who has been in the process of becoming for longer than they realized. And I want to build on that now. Because the shift from survival to receiving requires more than recognition. It requires you to know who you are becoming on the other side of this season. Not in vague terms, not in the language of general encouragement that sounds beautiful, but does not land anywhere specific. I want to give you a name for who you are, a precise name. One that carries the weight of what these years have actually produced in you and the specific role that production has prepared you to play in the lives of the people your next season will put you in contact with. You are a cycle breaker. I want to explain what that means before you decide whether it applies to you, because The term can sound either larger than your life or smaller than your calling, depending on how it is understood. A cycle breaker is not simply someone who had a difficult season and survived it. Survival alone does not produce a cycle breaker. What produces a cycle breaker is the specific combination of deep personal experience with a particular kind of pain, combined with the sustained refusal to allow that pain to become the defining story, combined with the emerging capacity to see what that pain actually was and to offer that seeing to others who are still inside it without a name for what they are experiencing. You are not just someone who waded through a long season. You are someone who waded through a long season and chose repeatedly and at significant personal cost not to become bitter about the waiting. That choice made in the small hours of the morning when no one was watching and the bitterness would have been entirely understandable is the specific choice that breaks cycles, not dramatic public declarations, not the moment of visible breakthrough. The small private choices made in the middle of the season when the choosing was hardest and the reward was least visible. Those choices are what a cycle breaker is built from. A cycle breaker carries the specific authority of someone who has been inside the thing they are now able to speak to. When you eventually stand in front of the person who is in the middle of the season you just survived, you will not be offering them theory. You will not be offering them borrowed wisdom or secondhand encouragement or the kind of hope that sounds good but has never been tested by anything real. You will be offering them the evidence of your own survival. You will be offering them the specific embodied knowledge that the season does end, that the quiet comes, that the kairos moment is real, that kava produces something that passive waiting never could, and that offering, the offering of a cycle breaker who has been where the listener currently is, carries a weight that no amount of education or eloquence can manufacture. It can only be earned, and you have earned it. A cycle breaker also carries the authority to refuse what was handed to them. Every chosen one who comes through a breaking season has the opportunity to pass the pattern forward or to stop it in their own life and become the first person in their line who responds differently. The specific patterns that this season has been dismantling in you, the fear-based decisions, the shrinking to fit environments that were too small, the editing of dreams to make them more acceptable to people who were not equipped to carry them, the silencing of the knowing in order to preserve relationships with people who found the knowing threatening. These patterns did not begin with you. They were inherited. They were passed to you by people who received them from people who received them from people who were also doing the best they could with what they had been given. You are not the origin of the patterns, but you are the chosen one who gets to be the end of them. The cycle breaker does not just survive the pattern. The cycle breaker becomes the point in the line where the pattern stops being inherited and starts being replaced. That is who you are. That is what these years have been building, not just a survivor, a cycle breaker. Someone whose survival becomes a gift to the people who come after them. Now I want to take you through a brief guided practice. I want to ask you to close your eyes if you are in a place where that is possible, and if not, to simply soften your focus and allow your attention to move inward for the next few moments. I am going to walk you through something, and I want you to stay with it rather than analyzing it as we go. Analysis can come after. For now, just receive. Picture yourself standing at a threshold. Not a dramatic cinematic threshold with light streaming through it and a choir accompanying the moment. A simple threshold, a doorway, the kind that exists between one room and another in an ordinary house. You are standing in the doorway with one foot on each side. Behind you is the room you have been living in. You can see it clearly from where you are standing. You can see the places where you sat in the early hours when sleep would not come. You can see the chair where you made the same calculations for the 100th time and came up with the same insufficient answer. You can see the corners of the room where the heaviest parts of this season accumulated, the grief, the confusion, the half-surrendered hopes, the prayers that felt like they disappeared into a ceiling that would not open. Look at that room honestly. Do not rush past it. Do not pretend it was not as heavy as it was. It was heavy, it was real. You lived there, and it cost you something real to live there with as much grace as you managed to carry. Acknowledge that cost. Let yourself feel the specific texture of what it took to remain in that room for as long as this season required. Not bitterness, just honest acknowledgement. You were faithful in that room. Even on the days when faithfulness felt like the most expensive choice available to you, you stayed. You kept showing up. You did not let the weight of the room turn you into someone unrecognizable to yourself. That matters. That is the evidence of who you actually are. Now turn your face forward. Look into the room ahead of you. It is not fully lit. You cannot see every corner of it. You cannot see every piece of furniture or every detail of what the space contains. But you can feel the quality of it. You can feel that it is different from the room behind you. The air in it feels different. The weight of it is different. Not lighter in the sense of being insignificant or superficial, but lighter in the sense of a season whose primary work is expansion rather than compression. The room ahead of you is larger than the room behind you. Not because your current life is small, but because what is ahead requires more space than what you have been occupying. And here is what I need you to notice about where you are standing. You are not outside the forward room, pressing your face against the glass, hoping eventually to be let in. You are in the doorway. The threshold is beneath your feet right now. You have already crossed the hardest distance. You are not approaching the entrance. You are standing in it. The step that remains is not the enormous, terrifying leap that the worst days of this season made it feel like. It is a single ordinary step forward, from doorway to room, from threshold to inhabitation, from the chosen one who has been waiting to the chosen one who has arrived. You are already there. You just have to look up and see it. Now I want to speak some things over you before we move forward, because there are blessings that belong to cycle breakers, and they need to be spoken out loud into the space where you are receiving this message. May the quiet that you have been reaching for in the middle of the noise finally settle into you as something permanent rather than occasional. May the clarity that has been arriving in fragments begin to arrive in full sentences that you can act on with confidence. May the relationships that are moving toward you find you in the posture of someone who knows their own worth well enough to receive them without shrinking to make them comfortable. May the provision that your assignment requires arrive not just in sufficient measure, but in the generous measure that reflects the size of what you were built to carry. May the dreams you edited to make them more acceptable to others be returned to you at their original size, and may you find in yourself the courage to speak them at that size to the people who are now present in your life specifically because they were built to receive them. May the pattern that ends with you produce a legacy in the people who come after you that is so different from what was handed to you that they can barely imagine what it cost to create the difference. May they inherit from you not the weight of the old cycle, but the freedom of the new one. And may that freedom be so embedded in who they become that they pass it forward again without knowing the name of the one who first chose to break the chain. May your Monday mornings feel different. Not because everything is resolved, but because the person walking into them is someone who has finally stopped arguing with their own calling and started inhabiting it. May the courage that carried you through the room behind you be the same courage. Not larger, not more dramatic, simply redirected, that carries you through the room ahead. You are a cycle breaker. You are a chosen one who was placed in this specific season for a specific purpose that required every day of the preparation. And you are standing on the threshold right now, not almost there, not getting closer there. The room ahead is already yours. The only thing left to do is step fully into it. I want to speak practically to you now, not because the interior work we have done together in this message is finished. It is never fully finished, but because chosen ones who have received a genuine shift in their interior landscape need somewhere concrete to put that shift. They need actions, real ones, specific ones, things that can be done today in the actual life you are living, with the actual resources you currently have, not the resources you are believing for or the circumstances you are hoping will change, but the ones that are present and available right now. Because the cycle breaker who understands who they are but does not translate that understanding into movement will find that the clarity fades faster than it arrived. Understanding without action is a beautiful room you visit but do not live in. Want you to live in what you have received today. So I want to walk you through 3 specific areas of your life that are in the process of shifting. And for each one, I want to give you something concrete. Not a vision statement, not an affirmation to repeat. An actual thing you can do today or tomorrow morning at the latest that places your body and your choices on the side of the movement that your interior life has already begun. The first area is your relationships, and the concrete action I want to give you here is one that most people in this type of content suggest, because it requires a kind of honesty that feels risky. Here is what I want you to do. I want you to identify one relationship in your life that has been costing you more than it has been returning. Not in a transactional sense, not the kind of cost that comes from genuinely investing in someone who's going through a hard season, but the kind of cost that comes from a relationship that requires you to be smaller than you are in order to survive it. The relationship where you consistently leave the conversation feeling less than you arrived. The connection where your growth is subtly unwelcome, where your clarity makes the other person uncomfortable, where the version of you that is emerging is met with a resistance that is sometimes explicit and sometimes expressed in a silence that says the same thing. I am not asking you to end that relationship today. I am asking you to name it, to yourself, honestly, to stop pretending to yourself that the cost is sustainable or that the dynamic will shift on its own without any change in how you show up within it. Naming it accurately is the first action, because chosen ones who name their relational reality honestly are chosen ones who can begin to make intentional choices within it, rather than simply reacting to it from the exhausted end of a season that has left them with fewer resources than they would like. The second action in the relational area is an addition rather than a subtraction. I want you to reach out today to one person whose presence in your life has felt like an appointment rather than an accident. The person whose name surfaces in your mind when you think about who actually sees you. The person with whom conversations feel like arriving somewhere rather than performing for someone. Send them something today. Not a long message that requires an emotional inventory to compose. Something simple. Something that says, I thought of you and I am glad you are in my life. That small act of intentional connection is not a small act in the economy of what the next season requires. It is the beginning of building the relational infrastructure that chosen ones need to carry what is coming. The right people in your life are not accessories to your assignment. They are part of the equipment. Begin treating them that way. The second area of concrete action is your purpose. And here I want to give you something that cuts through the paralysis that chosen ones in transition often experience when they try to think about their next step. The paralysis comes from the size of the vision. The vision is large, and the distance between where you currently are and where the vision lives feels so enormous that no single step seems worth taking, because no single step appears to make a measurable difference in that distance. And so the chosen one waits for the step that feels proportional to the vision, the big step, the dramatic step, the step that closes the gap in a way that is visible and confirms that the movement is real. That step rarely comes first, and waiting for it is one of the most effective ways to remain exactly where you are while believing you are waiting for something necessary. Here's what I want you to do instead. I want you to identify the smallest possible movement in the direction of your assignment that you could make today. Not the step that would impress anyone. Not the step that would constitute visible progress by any external measure. The smallest genuine movement. If your assignment involves writing, write one paragraph today. Not a chapter, not a plan for the book, one paragraph. If your assignment involves a business, make one phone call today, not a business plan. Not a financial projection, one call. If your assignment involves a creative work, spend 15 minutes on it today. Not the finished product, not the polished version. 15 minutes of actual engagement with the material. The reason this works is not strategic. It is neurological and it is spiritual simultaneously. Every time a chosen one takes a small genuine action in the direction of their assignment, something in the brain registers that the distance between the current self and the essence self is not theoretical. It is traversable. And that registration, repeated daily, compounded over weeks, changes the interior relationship between the chosen one and their calling from one of longing to one of active participation. The vision stops being something that lives somewhere ahead of you and starts being something you are already inside. And chosen ones who are already inside their assignment, even at the beginning stages, move differently. They carry themselves differently. They begin to attract the resources and connections and opportunities that align with where they are going rather than where they have been. The purpose action for today is therefore this. Identify the smallest genuine step. Take it before the day is over. Do not evaluate whether it was enough. It was enough. Take it again tomorrow. Build the habit of daily micro-movement in the direction of your assignment and watch what the accumulation of those movements produces over the next 90 days. You will not recognize the distance you have covered from the inside because you will have been moving gradually. But looked at from the buoy, outside, or from the vantage point of 90 days from now, the movement will be undeniable. The third area of concrete action is the one I said earlier that chosen ones are most cautious about engaging with directly. Provision, resources, the material reality of your life. And here I want to be both practical and honest, because spiritual bypassing in the area of finances is one of the things that keeps chosen ones in unnecessary security, while believing that trusting God means not engaging with the practical reality of their financial life. Here is the action I want you to take. I want you to look honestly at one area of your financial life that you have been avoiding looking at directly, not because you are irresponsible, but because the looking has felt too painful in a season when there was nothing immediately available to change what you would see. The avoidance is understandable, but avoidance in the area of provision keeps chosen ones in a posture of passivity toward their own material reality that is inconsistent with the active receiving posture we talked about in Part 7. Look at the thing you have been avoiding, not to punish yourself for what you see, not to spend an hour in shame about the distance between where things are and where they should be, simply to see it clearly, because clarity about your current financial reality is the foundation on which provision can actually land. Chosen ones who are vague about their material circumstances because the clarity is painful are chosen ones who cannot recognize provision when it begins to arrive because they have no clear baseline against which to measure the movement. Clarity is not discouragement. Clarity is the beginning of stewardship. And chosen ones who steward what they currently have with honesty and intentionality are chosen ones who find that the next level of provision has somewhere specific to go when it arrives. The specific action is this: spend 30 minutes today, not more, not a marathon of financial review that produces overwhelm rather than clarity, just 30 minutes, looking clearly at your current material reality. What is coming in? What is going out? Where the gaps are? What one practical adjustment is available to you within your current circumstances that moves even slightly in the direction of greater stability? One adjustment, not a complete overhaul. The same principle applies here as in the purpose area. The smallest genuine movement in the right direction, taken consistently, produces results that dramatic one-time efforts rarely sustain. Now I want to say something that ties all three of these areas together, because there is a principle that runs underneath all of them that I do not want you to miss. The principle is this: action taken from a place of trust is fundamentally different in quality and in result from action taken from a place of fear. The relational actions, the purpose actions, the provision actions I have described today can all be taken from either place. You can reach out to the right person because you trust that the right people are being assembled around you, or you can reach out to them in desperation because you are afraid of being alone. You can take the small step in the direction of your assignment because you trust that you are already inside your calling, or you can take it from a place of anxious effort that is trying to manufacture a result it does not believe is coming on its own. You can look clearly at your financial reality because you trust that clarity is the beginning of stewardship, or you can look at it from the contracted place of fear that has been keeping you from looking at all. The external action is the same in both cases. The internal posture is different, and the internal posture is what determines whether the action opens something or simply adds to the noise. So before you take any of the three actions I have described today, I want you to return briefly to the declaration from Part 3, the one that places your agreement on the side of the promise. Say it again in your own words. Remind yourself who is funding the assignment. Remind yourself that you are not doing these things in order to create a result that has not been promised. You are doing them in order to participate in a result that has already been prepared. There is an enormous difference between those two postures. One is exhausting, the other is energizing. Choose the energizing one. It is available to you right now. Type the words, "I am ready," into the comments section below if you recognize yourself in these three areas. Not because things have changed on the outside, but because inside you already know that you are ready to step into what is coming. When you type those words, you're not just realizing one thing, you are claiming it. And to the elect, declaration precedes manifestation. It's always been like that. The relationships are reorganizing around who you are becoming. The purpose is waiting for the first small step that tells it you are serious. The provision is moving toward the person who has stopped being vague about what they need and has begun to steward what they currently have with the clarity of someone who trusts what is coming. All three areas are in motion. Your job right now is not to force the motion. Your job is to participate in it with the small, specific, trust-sourced actions that tell heaven you are not just receiving this message as inspiration. You are receiving it as instruction. The action is available to you today. The person who takes it is the chosen one who is ready. And you are ready. You have been ready. The only thing that changes today is that you know it. We are near the end of this time together, and I want to begin this final section by doing something that most messages like this one do not do before they close. I want to thank you. Not in the way that a speaker thanks an audience for their attention, not the performative gratitude that fills space between one point and the next. I mean something specific, and I want you to receive it as specific. I want to thank you for the part of you that showed up today, even though showing up has not always been rewarded in the ways you needed it to be rewarded. The part of you that pressed play on this message, or stayed with it past the first few minutes, or kept listening even when something in you wanted to close it and return to the noise of your day. That part of you is not nothing. That part of you is the most important part. It is the part that has been keeping the flame alive in the seasons when everything around you was moving in the direction of extinguishing it. I know what it costs to keep showing up when showing up has not yet produced the visible result. I know what it costs to keep believing when belief has felt more like a discipline than a feeling for longer than is comfortable to admit. I know what it costs to sit with a message like this one and allow yourself to actually receive it rather than listening to it from behind the glass of a protection that says, I will not hope too much because hoping too much has hurt me before. That glass is understandable. That protection was earned. And the fact that you are still here, still receiving, still allowing something in you to say yes to what this message is offering, even with the glass, even with the protection, even with the part of you that is still cautious, that is evidence of a resilience that I do not want to pass over quickly. You have not been alone in this season. I want to say that one more time before we close, not as a comfort phrase, but as a specific truth. All across the world, right now, in different time zones and different languages and different versions of the same season you have been walking through, other chosen ones are sitting with this exact message. They are in their cars before they go inside after a long day. They are on the edge of their beds in the early hours of the morning. They are in quiet rooms with the door closed, giving themselves a few minutes before the rest of the house wakes up and the day begins its demands. They are in exactly the position you are in, receiving exactly what you are receiving, recognizing exactly what you are recognizing. You are in a room that is far more populated than it appears from the inside of your own experience. The chosen ones who are walking into their transformation right now number in the thousands, and you are one of them. You are not a solitary figure in an empty corridor. You are part of a movement of people whose seasons are turning simultaneously, whose preparation is completing at the same moment, whose kairos is arriving in the same window of time. You are surrounded, even in the silence, by others who know exactly what it feels like to be you right now. I want to give you one final practice before we close. Not a long one, not a complicated one. A simple act of release that chosen ones who are stepping from one season into the next need to perform consciously rather than accidentally. because the weight you have been carrying does not automatically fall away when the season turns. It has to be set down, intentionally, in a specific moment, by a specific choice. Otherwise, it travels with you into the next room and sits in the corners of the new season the way it sat in the corners of the old one. So I want you to picture yourself at a threshold one more time. The same doorway from part 8. You are standing in it. Behind you is the room of the waiting season. And I want you to do something before you step fully forward. I want you to picture yourself reaching into your chest and removing everything you have been carrying that belongs in that room and not in the next one. Not the wisdom, not the strength, not the empathy that the hard season produced, not the knowing that the wilderness gave you and the patience that Kava built into you. Those come with you. Those are yours. They are part of who you are now, and they do not get left behind. But the weight of the unanswered question that you have been carrying since the season began, set it down at the threshold. Leave it there. You do not need to carry the question into the next room, because the nexus is the place where the answer lives in, and you cannot receive the answer while your hands are still full of the weight of the question. Set it down at the threshold. Let it stay in the room behind you. The grief of the relationships that did not survive the waiting, the ones that left without enough explanation, and the ones that ended with too much of it. Set that grief down at the threshold. Not because the grief was not real or the loss was not significant, but because the next room is being populated with relationships that require your hands to be open, and grief held tightly makes open hands impossible. Set it down. It has been carried long enough. It can stay in the room behind you. The diminished version of your dream, the edited one, the one you made smaller so it would be safer to carry and less painful. If it did not arrive at full size, set that down too. Leave the small version at the threshold. Take the original into the next room, the full-sized one, the one that felt too large to say out loud for too long. The next room is large enough to hold it. The people in the next room are equipped to receive it. Take it with you at its original size and speak it at its original volume. You have earned that. The story that this season has been telling about you, the narrative of the person who is almost ready, almost there, almost finished with the preparation, almost at the threshold. Set that story down at the threshold and leave it there. You are not almost anywhere. You are already there. The story of almost is the story of the room behind you. The story of the room ahead is a story that begins with arrival, and you are already inside it. Step forward, fully, both feet in the new room, both hands open, the full-size dream held at its original volume, the wisdom and the strength and the empathy and the knowing that the season produced carried with you intact. Step forward as the cycle breaker you have become, as the chosen one who has been funded by something larger than their circumstances and protected by something wiser than their understanding and prepared by something more thorough than they could have arranged for themselves. Now, I want to mention something one final time, and I wanted to do it without pressure and without urgency, simply as a quiet reminder for anyone for whom the connection between the 7 minutes of the returning protocol and the science of what the brain does in intentional stillness resonated somewhere real today. If the genius wave met you in the middle of this message, if something in you recognized it not as a product being sold, but as a tool that aligns with the specific practice of the chosen one who is learning to return to their own frequency, then it is waiting for you in the pinned comment below. Not with a deadline designed to manufacture anxiety, not with a pressure that contradicts everything this message has been building toward. Simply available. For the chosen one who knows it is a yes. The link is there. The 90-day guarantee is there. The research that Dr. Jesus Rivers spent 30 years producing is there. If it is for you, you will know. And if you know, the pinned comment is where you find it. I also want to ask you one last time, gently and genuinely, to consider supporting this work if it has reached you somewhere real today. Not because this channel needs your money to survive, but because there is a chosen one waking up tomorrow morning who has not yet found a message that names what they are carrying. And the way this message reaches them is through the generosity of the people it reached today. If you can donate, even a small amount, there is a way to do that, and your contribution goes directly toward making sure the next message finds the next person who is one naming away from their own shift. You can find that option in the description below. And if donating is not available to you right now, that is completely understood and completely fine. Like this video instead. Share it with one person whose name came to your mind while you were listening. Subscribe so that the next message finds you before you have to go looking for it. Every one of those actions is an act of generosity toward a chosen one you may never meet. Do it for them. And do it because you know what it felt like before this message found you. You know what it feels like to be in the season without anyone to name it. You know what it costs to carry the weight of a calling that no one around you has language for. And you know what shifts, even slightly, when someone finally puts accurate words around the shape of what you have been living. Be the reason that shift happens for the next person. Pass it forward, not with obligation. With the generosity of someone who has just received something real and wants the person behind them on the path to receive it too. All across the world, other chosen ones are walking into this exact same message. Some of them are walking into it right now, in the minutes after you finish listening. Some of them will find it tomorrow. Some of them will find it in 3 weeks, at the exact moment their season requires it. Every share you make is a hand extended to a chosen one you will never see, but whose life your generosity will touch in ways neither of you will fully understand until much later. You came into this message carrying something heavy. I hope you leave it carrying something true. Not lighter in the sense of the burden being removed, though that is coming, but lighter in the sense of finally knowing the name of what the burden was finally. Finally understanding the season you have been in. Finally standing fully in the doorway with both feet moving forward, rather than one foot held back by a story that belonged in the room behind you. You are a cycle breaker. You are also a chosen one. You are funded by something that does not run out and protected by something that does not sleep and prepared by something that does not waste a single day of your story. The provision is real. The Kairos moment is real. The Kava years have produced something real. The shifts in your relationships and your purpose and your resources are real and already in motion. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are not the chosen one who almost made it. You are the one who is already there.